Hello there, a very good evening everyone, and welcome to our live interactive question and answer session. Many of you will be hopefully used to these regular sessions that we do normally during the day, where it's your opportunity to ask lots of different questions about all aspects of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole and what the council's up to and all sorts of other things. Tonight we're doing a special session where we're talking about our local plan. The local plan will be a document that we're going to be putting together later on in the year, which is a really important document that helps us curate the place and put together all of the plans and policies in place that are going to direct how our area works in the future. It's a document that looks very far into the future, into about 2038, and is really important in terms of place shaping. So tonight we'll have a question and answer session. So whether you're joining us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on Facebook, you can put any questions into the comments, and then we'll endeavour to try and get through over the next hour as many questions as possible. Before we do that, I'm going to introduce a short video that talks about what the local plan will be. So the local plan, as I mentioned, is a really important document. We won't be actually doing the local plan itself until later on this year. But at the moment, we're doing a big consultation where we're trying to get a really early steer from residents, from businesses, as to some of the very important issues that we're going to have to consider when we do that important piece of work. And so it's really important to feed into that consultation, because the more guidance we can get from residents and businesses as the kind of things that you think are important, the more that we can incorporate that as we do the next stages of the local plan going into the future. So before we talk more, I'll introduce a little bit of a video that will talk about some of the issues that we're going to be talking about tonight. Brilliant. So in a moment, I'm going to be introducing the real experts here. Joined with us tonight, we've got Nick Perrins, who's our head of planning, and also Laura Bright, who's one of the leading planners that we've got in the authority that's leading on the local plan process, to tell you a little bit about the consultation that we've got underway, how you can get involved, and also to answer any questions about some of the themes that we're consulting on. Important to note that the work of the local plan will start later on this year. What we're consulting on at the moment are some of the issues that we know are going to be important when we have to address that document in fuller detail later on. It's a cross-party piece of work, so it's not a political document. It's been put together with all the parties in a cross-party working group. And the idea is to get a really early steer on those important issues so that we can use that to flesh out the next stage of the documents, which will then be consulted on even further. So as I mentioned earlier on, this document is a statutory document. All areas have to do it. It will be the first local plan for the BCP region. And the idea with the local plan is it's our plan for the whole area. It puts into planning policy things like where we should build our homes, where we should locate our businesses. We're very blessed with an amazing natural environment in this area. So how do we protect that? And what we really appreciate at this early stage is a steer from people as to what the most important parts are from their point of view. So when you consider things like climate change, we have options within the local plan to set planning policy on how far we should go on climate measures for buildings, and also things like how many affordable homes we should build, where we should put them, where our parks should be, and as I mentioned earlier on, how we can protect our natural environment. Really important to get involved as early as possible, which is why we're doing this very early pre-consultation to get some guidance on that. couple of major issues that are in this document, which are, are always really important to people, are things like the Greenbelt, for example. So Greenbelt, we're in a great natural environment here. We've got the sea on one side, and we've got a swathe of Greenbelt all to our north. And the Greenbelt is a really important part of our fabric of our area to stop urban sprawl. It stops the urban area, extending out and joining up into other areas. So we have plans to protect the Greenbelt as much as possible. There is another argument that we're consulting on, in that Greenbelt sometimes can be a very good area to get family homes, where we need some affordable family homes. But we need to steer from people on what is most important from you. I think we've got a plan at the moment to try and densify as much of the development in the more urban areas to protect the Greenbelt, but there are options that we've got to consider in that. Also in this document, we're looking at the housing numbers. We've got some housing numbers that we've got from government that we have to consult on. And work towards. The government's standard methodology dictates a figure of around 2,600 homes per year, which is a really big target. In the area, we've only ever delivered 1,300 homes per year to date. So that would mean a real change on how we deliver housing across the area. We've come up with a different method which looks at the data behind some of the government's methodology and come forward with a much lower figure of 1,600 per annum, which is still ambitious, but probably more achievable. But again, we want your views on whether that's a right direction to take. And there's 8 other areas that we're consulting on as well to get your really early steer on. So before we talk more in detail at the issues and take your questions, what I'll do now is bring in one of my colleagues, Laura Bright, who's one of the senior planners, who could talk about the consultation we've got underway, how to get involved, all of the different interactive ways. She's not losing her voice quite as much as me as well, because I'm on the verge at the moment. So yeah, hopefully be able to understand her more as well.
I was just going to give you a quick run through of our consultation materials and how you can get involved in this consultation on our website. That's the main place to go to engage in this particular consultation, and that's just being shared with you on the screen now. That's the Have Your Say hub, and on that page you can view our consultation document, and that's where you can really see all the various issues we're trying to address in this local plan, and where we have different options for addressing those issues. So it is worth having a look at that before you give us your comments in writing, and we really do need people's comments in writing, as Councillor Broadhead said, to give us a steer on these key issues. And on this page you'll find our online survey. You can go through and complete the sections of that survey that you're interested in. You don't need to complete all of the survey. If you're just interested in certain topics, you can just address those topics in your answers. Our email address is also on there if you just want to email comments to us. And at the bottom of the page there, you've also got a number of interactive maps that we've got. They show various sites that have either been promoted to us or potentially identified as having some potential for development. You can go on there, zoom into these maps, have a look at the various sites, and as you can see on there, there's some blue pins on there. You can drop your own pins on these sites and make comments, and all of those will form part of the consultation as well. So if you don't want to go through the whole online survey process, or you're just interested in sites that may be near you or affect you, or a certain place that you're interested in, you can use these maps to drop pins, and that will all be collated and analysed as part of the consultation response. So the consultation is open until the 25th of March, and we really would encourage people to use the online survey or to use our email address to get in touch with us and give us your comments on these issues.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura. And I think it's also worth saying, I mean, this is quite new technology. There are other ways to get involved in this as well. But the interactive maps and all of the development that's on there, this is quite an unusual way of doing things as well, isn't it? Because actually what most of the local authorities do when they're doing their local plans is they get all of the sites in that have been suggested to them from developers and others. They kind of pick the ones that will work and pick the ones that don't work and then consult on them. We've taken the decision not to do that. That comes later. So every single thing everything that we have been suggested could be developable is actually available for public consultation at the moment. I think that's really worth noting, actually, because a number of people, if you click on your area and you see lots of development, if you think, oh my gosh, is this what's actually going to happen? But that's not the case at all, is it? What we're doing here is just anything that's been suggested to us before we even start thinking about whether we want it to happen as part of the local plan process. We're asking for a really early steer on people as to whether they think it's right or appropriate for their area before we consider it as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We've put all the sites out there for comment at this stage, and then the decision, so no decisions on those sites have been made. That will happen at the next stage once we've had people's feedback, once we've collected more evidence about those sites. So yeah, this is the chance to have a look at what, as you say, it's not the council's proposals. Some of these sites are what private developers or private individuals are suggesting to us, and we really want people's views on those and which ones we should do a bit more work on, or which ones really have the potential to form part of our local plan as we go forward with the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Laura. So now's the time to start asking your questions. So what we've done in this really early consultation is we've identified 10 areas that we think are going to be ones that we really need some early steer on from the public in preparation for that local plan work that will take place from the end of this year. So 10 areas covering things from our natural environment, our town centres, our economy and where our businesses go, climate change, health and well-being, not with necessarily our ideas, unless there are probably only one course of action, but more to get that early feedback from people so that we can use that feedback to create what is going to be, a bit of a blueprint, certainly from a planning policy point of view, for how the whole area operates. So if you've had a chance to interact with that document already, you'll be aware of those 10 areas, but by no means as well are they exhaustive. So, it's a very important document that will cover, everything to do with the fabric of our place. So we haven't covered everything, but what we've tried to do is tease out the 10 areas that are probably going to need the most steer from the public so that we can get that early feedback to take through to the next stage. So if you've got questions about the process, by all means, pop them into the comments by whichever medium you're joining, or indeed, if you've got any comments about directions that you think we should go or of confusion about the process, now's the time you're asking. We've got the experts here on hand to answer. So I'll go straight into some of the questions that are popping up. I've got one from Carol Mortimer, got in nice and early at 6:05. Major changes need to be put in place on the A31. Amount of traffic is building up and causing problems on B roads around Herne West, Parley and Ferndown. It's exactly right. Congestion is a huge problem across the area. Nick, could you maybe talk about that, and maybe just talk about how the local plan, when we do it later this year, will be able to address some of the congestion problems, or even whether it might stop us taking some of the decisions that we might want to do or not want to do.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Broadhead. It's a really good question, and it's a fundamental part of the local plan process. Ensuring the transport strategy and how we accommodate development is sensitively planned. So essentially what we're doing as we go forward, we are collecting our evidence base, and we'll be doing a lot of transport modelling. We'll be looking at the options, when we start looking at the sites and what people say about sites where developments might be located. And once we've got that kind of spatial distribution, we will be testing that in terms of how that will be absorbed into the current infrastructure. The outcome of that is probably we need more infrastructure. So a big part of this piece is to have a big infrastructure plan which goes with it to make sure that the growth, wherever it may be, can be supported properly. So yeah, essentially a lot of work to be done on that. And it will be very much part of the next stage in terms of the infrastructure needs and the modelling and the evidence. And people will be able to see all that and comment on that when it comes out later on in the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. Right, let's delve into some more of the questions. Nice and early on as well at 6:02, we had a question from Barbara, which talks about, well, why do we need a plan until 2038? Why such a long-term view when we've got lots of different issues to consider? Laura, could you, obviously there's a statutory process here, and local plans get updated on a regular basis. So could you tell us a little bit more about why we're having to plan in that ultra long term?
Yeah, and as you said, it's a statutory process with local plans. They have to look over a 15-year time horizon, and that gives us a chance to have a strategic view about where the area is heading over the longer term, how we will accommodate housing needs over the long term, employment needs, address those transport impacts. And some of that, some of those things need a long time to come into fruition in terms of delivering infrastructure and mitigation. So we are required to look over a 15-year time period. We do review local plans every 5 years. We're aware sort of things change, but initially local plan does have to look over that time period. It allows us to sort of fully address the issues, looking forward in a strategic way across the whole area over that 15-year period.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Right, at 6:05, we had a question from Melanie Swain. Tall buildings are a concern. This is an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, there's potentially a dichotomy here. If we want to, well, I think we all know and accept that we need homes, particularly homes for young people. If we want to protect the green belt in particular, there's a lot of the intensification on our brownfield and urban sites, particularly sites in central Bournemouth and central Poole, is a really good way to not have to build on any of our green belt, and is in a very sustainable location. But by their very nature, they tend to be taller buildings as well. So do you think that's a binary choice, Laura or Nick, or is that something that we could work into the mix in a more kind of creative way, do you think?
Asking some questions about we're asking some questions about this as part of the consultation. We've got a specific section in the consultation document about tall buildings, and we do have some options there about whether we try and focus the tall buildings in the town centres of Bournemouth and Poole in particularly. Probably have a bit more scope to accommodate taller buildings than perhaps Christchurch does. So we're asking people as part of the consultation whether that's the right approach, or should we consider taller buildings in other parts of the urban area as well? So that's very much an issue we're trying to get a steer on through this consultation and understand people's views on to help shape our development strategy as we move forward.
Okay, and that's why it's important to feed into this pre-consultation. But, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're quite unusual in doing this. Our neighbours over in Dorset Council, who started at around the same time as us, took the decision to go straight into a draft local plan and to consult on that. We've taken the decision in a cross-party way to do, but this is our second of our issues consultation to get a little bit more of a steer before we go into the stage of actually putting in. But it only works if people get involved. We've had a tremendously high hit rate so far. The consultation is open to till the 25th of March. I think the team were telling me we've had triple the number of people take part in this consultation to anything that we've done. So that's great, but there's still plenty of time to give us your views. Let's go to some more questions. There's a question at 6:13 come in from Clive regarding Poole Town Centre and the improvement of leisure and community activities. Why is there no mention of improving Poole stadium facilities, whereas a Dolphin Leisure Centre and Lighthouse are both mentioned for improvement? Who wants to take this one, Laura or Nick? Nick, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I'm happy to offer a view on that one, Councillor Broadhead. Yeah, I mean, it's very much, we recognise obviously the Dolphin Leisure Centre as a key community use, leisure use. So absolutely want views on that, and we also recognise that Poole Stadium is also an existing key community facility. So I think it's very much a case of, well, we're open to ideas, really. We're not saying that won't be part of the plan, because it absolutely will. The existing plan for Poole already has that area allocated for some form of enhancement and redevelopment over time. So it's already part of existing plans, but we very much want to hear views on what people think about any area, in particular Poole Stadium. So it hasn't been not mentioned on purpose. It's just very much we're focusing on the other leisure centre facility in terms of ideas around that. So yeah, happy to receive views on what people think that the future of that facility might be like in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. While we're waiting for some more questions to come in, earlier on I talked around the different areas that we're looking at to try and get the steer from in this early consultation. Laura, could you give us a little bit of background on some of the areas? I mean, in particular, we've got a section on regenerating our town centres. Some of the ideas that we're consulting on in that, but also the ways that people could feed in their own ideas into this process so that we can try and take that forward as well.
Yeah, we've got a whole section in this consultation document about regenerating the town centres, and some of the questions have touched on this in terms of sort of empty shops and some of the challenges I think many town centres are facing all over the country. So essentially we've set out some recommendations in there about things we could do in the different town centres for Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch. Some ideas about trying to increase the number of homes in those centres. Having more people living there could help support the vitality and vibrancy of the shops and make them more sustainable going forward. We talk about investments in the Bournemouth International Centre and the seafront, about boosting connections between different parts of the town centre as well. And again, we touched on the idea of tall buildings in Bournemouth town centre, and is that appropriate and where? And as part of the consultation, we really would like to, it's not just about responding to these ideas, it is about suggesting people's own ideas as well, which they can do through the survey. There's some things in there about the diversification of shops. We know there's empty shops and the retail environment is struggling, but there's the opportunity to diversify some of those into other uses. We're obviously seeing, as you would expect in a tourism town, restaurants and cafes coming into some of those traditional retail units, but also other uses, sort of more sort of employment uses coming into those shops, which all adds to the vibrancy of our town centres and helps to address some of the issues around empty shops. And we have options there as well in terms of how we zone different parts of the town centre and what different uses can be located where, which can make it more flexible in terms of what different uses can happen where. So there's, as I said, there's a whole section on this within the document. There's also some specific ideas about Poole town centre, trying to create a better sense of arrival. We know there's ongoing issues with the bus station area and the rail station area as well, trying to work with Network Rail to resolve some of those issues and the bus companies as well. So there's some ideas set out in there, trying to improve the connection between the lighthouse and the Dolphin Centre. The Kingdon Road environment can be quite challenging for people to navigate around at the moment. So we've set out some information around those kind of ideas. And in Christchurch as well, we've got some ideas set out about some things in the town centre, such as improvements surrounding the Two Rivers Meet Leisure Centre, potentially embracing some of the opportunities of sites around that Stony Lane area, which are currently, there is some vacant brownfield land, which may have potential subject to resolving some flood risk concerns in that area. And we're really keen to hear what people's views on those ideas are. And as I said, if people have got other ideas they want to contribute through the consultation, we can take that all on board and moving forward to the next stage.
Thanks, Laura. And I think it's also important that we talk a lot about change, and a number of our areas are going through change. Some of our town centres are going through periods of change. Our employment is changing. We've got some absolute superstar industries across BCP, and we need to evolve with them. But of course, there are also areas that don't need change, or where change isn't good as well. And it would be important to get people's feedback on areas that you think are working just fine. Now, actually, what we found over the pandemic is that we've got 19 different high streets across the BCP region. Many of our district high streets are doing jolly well. There are a number of our district high streets that are working, really well. People have rediscovered them. They've got full occupancy, whereas actually, the Poole and Bournemouth town centres in particular are undergoing a period of rapid change, like many of the more regional high streets across the country. You then come to areas like Christchurch town centre, where again it's more historic, it's more of a natural environment there, probably not as suitable for change as well. So it's really important to get people's views, not just on areas where you think change should happen and can happen, but also areas that you think are working well, that you want to see protected, particularly when we're talking around our natural environment as well. And we're one of the most beautiful places to live in the country. People want to live here for a reason. It's the kind of thing we want to protect and enhance and not change unless we absolutely have to. On the Christchurch one in particular, there was a question I saw around, where was it? From Wendy Hill. Why has Christchurch been put forward for 4 sites for housing development? More traffic, doctors are already overused. I'll pass to Nick on this, but I think the answer to the question, Wendy, is anything that has been promoted to us by the development community, we're seeking consultation on. So rather than look at things and go, well, we don't like the look of it, we don't think it works, we need to get that feedback before we do the local plan document later on this year. So anything that's out for consultation at the moment isn't something that we are proposing. It's something that we want your views on, so that when we issue that document in particular, we can then figure out what planning policy works for what area. Any particular comments on these housing sites or housing sites in Christchurch in general, maybe Nick?
It's exactly right what you said, Councillor Broadhead about, these are sites which have been promoted to us, so therefore it's the right thing to do to consult the community around those sites. They are presented. The specific sites, as with any particular site in the urban area, there will come with challenges. There's probably some flooding issues around some of them in terms of the need to provide infrastructure. So, we need to obviously have people's views about all of that. Are these suitable sites we should be exploring further? And Christchurch as a whole, obviously needs to be very carefully planned for and managed. And part of this process is to really understand views about where housing might go, because Christchurch will have high housing needs, as does Poole and Bournemouth, and therefore we do need to get a good balance. But it's got to be right for the areas. But that's basically the answer to the question. They've been promoted to us, so we're duty bound. It's the right thing to do to ask people's views on them.
And that's why it's really important to feed in, isn't it? So that we can figure out what the local public's view is on some of the things that have been put forward. Compare that with the things like the housing needs assessment that we've done as well, so that we can, there's a tremendous amount of young people in need of housing at the moment. So we need to make sure that we're providing, particularly affordable housing for young people as well. And where is the most appropriate place or not for them to go. Right, so I've got a question that came through from David Foster at 6:20 around Bournemouth Airport. So would Bournemouth Airport be better employed for affordable housing, seeing how close Southampton Airport is? Nick, what's your take on that?
Well, Bournemouth Airport it's an operational airport. It is successful, and it has a big strategic allocation at the moment in terms of growing that over time and providing employment land. And one of the principal reasons for that, yes, it's there already and operational, but there's actually an environmental constraint on being able to locate housing there, and that's important to note. It's very much an internationally protected designation around heath limit sites, where you can't build housing within certain distance of that protected area, and that affects quite a large part of the airport area. So therefore, in that in mind, it's proposed and felt that it's actually the right thing to do to support it as an employment location on a strategic level.
Great, thanks for that. Right, let's pick up some other questions. And if you're just joining us, welcome. We're here until 7 o'clock this evening. A special session on the local plan process. We'll be doing our local plan later on this year. We're in the middle of a big consultation to get an early steer on some of the major issues that we're going to have to consider as part of that process. So by all means, whichever medium you're joining us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, put your questions into the comment section. We're going to try and get through as many as we can tonight. If not, we've got the council team on hand to try and answer separately as well. And whether that be things to do with the actual consultation process itself and how you can get involved in any specific questions, or indeed any questions about the 10 areas that we're looking at, or any more where you think it would be important to feed in. But before we move on to other questions, Laura, or Nick, either one of you, I mentioned the fact that the actual creation of the local plan is going to come later, and that this is a pre-consultation. Could you give us a flavour on what comes next as part of the local plan creation process, and what kind of level of public engagement we can expect on the next stages when we start to actually put some plans onto a page to get drafts and feedback from local people? Laura, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether Nick wanted to pick that one up, but I'm happy to. So yeah, following on from this consultation process, there is a lot more work to do to turn the issues and options consultation into a draft of a local plan. And we do want to come back to communities and engage with them further as part of this process. We have been in libraries this week in part of this consultation, and it has been great to speak to people and actually and be able to answer their questions and get their views. And I think now some of the restrictions have finished in terms of sort of face-to-face engagement. There will be a real opportunity as we start to draft the local plan and really hone in on our development strategy, particularly those communities that are affected by that and by the location of different types of development. We will be looking at existing residents groups and forums that we can go and speak to and explain those plans and get their input into it, with a view of developing a draft local plan by the end of this year. And that itself will be subject to a period of further public consultation where everybody can get involved. We do have to submit our final of the draft of the local plan to the Secretary of State for examination, and the plan does get examined by a government inspector. to make sure it's sound and robust. So there is a fair amount of work to do to get to that stage, which, as I said, will involve the engagement with communities as we go through that process. It's not a quick process. There's still a lot of work to do and a lot of things that feed into that. But this is an important first step in preparing that plan.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Laura. So I think the summary is we're already on the second pre-consultation. There's going to be a heck of a lot more to come, isn't there? And actually, I think one of the things, now that touchwood, we're emerging from the pandemic, it was great to be able to put the drop-in sessions back in that we always wanted into this consultation. So we managed to squeeze them in the end and got in just in time with the restrictions moving forward. But we'll be doing a lot more consultation as part of the next stage of the processes. What I think is really interesting is the level of extent we're getting in the online consultation. The ability to look at the maps and drop pins, what you like, what you don't like, to only fill out the parts of the consultation that you want, rather than have to do the whole thing. But equally, you can pop into our libraries and get involved in this and email us and get paper copies and things like that as well. So there's lots of different ways, but there's a tremendous amount more to come. Right, let's jump back into the questions. We're about halfway through. I'm sincerely hoping my voice is going to last throughout most of this. It's like my worst nightmare, losing my voice, for anybody that knows me. So at 6:15, we've got a question from Louise Collins. Is there a limit on the height of the building? She references Hilton Hotel in Bournemouth as something that she doesn't like and too tall. What's the answer to that question? Do we have limits on heights of the buildings? Is that something that we can address when we do the local plan, or are there other means to address that? Laura.
When planning applications are assessed, they're assessed against our current local plans. There's no specific height limits set out in those local plans. Within the Bournemouth local plan, there are tall building zones within the town centre areas where we think tall buildings are more appropriate. So buildings over 6 stories high, for example, within the Lansdowne area, that's deemed to be, in the current local plan, a suitable location for tall buildings. So we're asking, as part of this, as this BCP local plan, is that still appropriate? We could seek to introduce height limits as part of that. We do have some powers, particularly through design codes. They would probably be separate documents to the local plan, but certainly through design coding, we will have more scope to really think about things like height, building materials, some of the aesthetic points with buildings which perhaps haven't been picked up in detail in the past. There's certainly, I think, a big push now and a drive for better quality design, and that's coming through government guidance as well. And I think that's something, as an authority, we are keen to sort of pick up as part of our placemaking agenda and think about where design codes are appropriate. And those themselves would be prepared in consultation with communities to ensure that the contents of the codes reflect community aspirations and the general aspirations for good design. So going forward, I think that is something, particularly if we get a strong steer on through the consultation on that, will be something we're looking to pick up, and either through the local plan itself or through supplementary documents to it, we'll really be looking at sort of design quality in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Laura. And actually, relatively hot on the press, we've just been chosen by government to get some funds to do a pilot design code, and in the Lansdowne area itself. So that's a really good example, because tall doesn't necessarily mean ugly. A lot of it is down to the implementation. And I suppose one of the other points around tall buildings in the very sustainable locations. So you take Boscombe and Bournemouth as a good example. There's very a lot of younger people who don't have cars and are quite happy to be in more apartment living without cars, which is great in those sustainable locations, great for our climate agenda as well. And when we've got housing targets, having a higher density of people in those urban locations is a way to hit our target housing numbers and protect our more rural and green belt as well. But that's a choice, and it may well be, you might think the opposite. You might think that actually one of the things that we're really not providing at the moment is affordable family detached homes, and actually there is a sensible green belt that you might want to release to achieve that. So there's all different options within there that people can feed in, but we do have that balance, don't we? When you provide something at one place, it kind of comes out at the other as well. So I'm going to move on to some other questions. 614, Christina Mogg. We've had a few of these around second homes, a lot of emotive kind of responses around why can't we just ban second homes? Because there's a danger that sometimes, you build new developments and they only get taken up from second homes anyway. Nick, do we have the option of banning second homes, and what would be the consequence if we could? Is it a wise decision? Is it something that people can feed their views on?
Yeah,
Maybe
thanks.
the easy one, by the way, Nick. There you go.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the first thing to say, we really obviously want people's views on the issue of second homes, because this is all about the evidence. We need the evidence in order to plan appropriate policies to deal with issues. We need the evidence. So it's one of these things which comes up quite a lot, but in previous plans, the evidence hasn't been quite there in terms of doing anything creative around policy. The basic answer is you can do things in planning policy to control second homes if the evidence is there which highlights that's an issue. So I think I would probably encourage people to put in their views about second homes. They can be good. They can be good for an area in terms of helping to sustain housing delivery rates to meet targets and those sort of things. But equally, they can obviously be very, or they can be harmful in certain cases. So I think for us, for BCP, we need to have a good understanding of what the second home issue is and where it's affecting communities at the moment, and how we might respond in policy terms. So it is it's a difficult one, but it can be done if the evidence is there to prove that it's a real issue for BCP to solve.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Right, some more questions coming in. I've got a number around the town centre. We've talked about it a little bit already, but clearly it's absolutely very, very topical at the moment. 6:30, Melanie Swain coming in via LinkedIn. We really need to work on Bournemouth town centre as a priority. A reduced need for shops, but an ongoing need for social meeting places. Currently near a ghost town. Laura, you spoke a little bit earlier on around the consultation we're doing on the town centres. Moving forward, so let's say we get a lot of feedback that's saying, actually we do need to change the direction of Bournemouth town centre, fewer shops, more experiences, more social meeting places, as Melanie has pointed out. How can we put that into practice when we come to the local plan creation stage? What levers do we have to make that a reality? Because we don't own the buildings in most of these areas. So how can we put that into action?
As well. Sorry,
well,
spoke too soon. There have been some changes in this area because the uses of buildings are essentially controlled by the use classes order, and you can basically control what buildings are used for what use class. And that used to be very specific in terms of, there's a retail use class, there's a retail use class for employment, there's a retail use class for restaurants and pubs, and it was all very separate and defined. So you could basically say a whole frontage of shops had to fall solely within the retail use class. I think the government as well have recognised that this is a changing situation nationally. They have sought to introduce more flexibility and combined a lot of these use classes together. So there is more flexibility now in terms of you don't necessarily have to apply for a change of use if you want to change from a shop to a cafe, and we can introduce these sorts of controls to make it easier for people to be able to change the use to, say, meeting places or certain types of employment uses. I mean, not all types of employment uses would necessarily be appropriate within a town centre. We can also look at the extent of those kind of commercial frontages as well. Are they still valid to have such a high proportion of commercial frontage within some parts of the town centre? I think there's an issue about getting the balance right there, because there is still this need for the restaurants, for the community meeting spaces, cultural spaces as well. So you still do need some space for those activities. Do we need quite as much? Can some of it be repurposed for other things? Maybe some of that is residential, maybe some of that is in terms of office space. So we do have some powers through the local plan to define the extent of commercial frontages and to define what use classes happen within those frontages as well. So we can look at that as part of the local plan, and part of the local plan in the next stage is coming up with a sort of map of all these policies as well. So we can map out which frontages are designated for commercial purposes, which areas are designated for sort of more traditional employment, manufacturing type uses. So that all kind of comes through the next stage of the local plan, where we're preparing our policies map. So it is interesting to get public views on that, and views, of course, from businesses and the sort of property market as well, in terms of the demands for space, and our evidence base in terms of our needs for retail space and employment space as well. So that all feeds into the decision-making process.
Brilliant, thank you, Laura. And look, very topical at the moment, isn't it? We've seen a tremendous acceleration of the change of our high streets. Now's the time to do that analysis, get the public feedback, because we do have those levers, as you talked about, to maybe make those changes and help them come to fruition where appropriate. We've got a question come in at 6:35 from Barbara. A few people have talked around affordable homes and failure to deliver affordable homes over the last 5 years. We haven't come close to targets. Nick, maybe you could address this one. We've got a section in this pre-consultation where we talk about the need for affordable homes. What's your view on the best input we can get from people? Because I think if you ask most people, do we want more affordable homes? The answer is always going to be yes, isn't it? But it's not quite that simple, isn't it? What levers do we have? Again, you need to use that phrase. How can people feed in what types of affordable homes and where they can go to make sure that we actually get them delivered?
Yeah, it's a key issue for the plan to address in terms of what the planning system can do to deliver affordable homes, which is, such a crucial social issue to resolve. In terms of what we can do and what people can do, I think they can give us views about, what's important in terms of the development process. Because one of the issues we have in planning is that there's so many competing things in terms of, building, paying for development and paying for infrastructure. And affordable housing is one of these areas where it comes down to affordability and viability in the process. We need to really understand, okay, what is the priority for this plan to deliver? Is it going to be affordable housing? Is it going to be providing contributions to transport or open spaces? All these things together, and there isn't any simple answer to this. It's about getting the right balance. It's also about planning the right forms of development in the right places. To be able to get the best mix, and making sure that overall there's a choice. And that's a big part of this. Affordability is not only about the traditional affordable housing. There are other forms of product which come out all the time. For example, discounted market housing. That's a relatively new product. So there's various avenues and policy which we can use on developments to try and get the best mix. And there might be choices around the greenbelt again. That's another area where it can deliver affordable housing. So we'd quite be interested in views about whether that's the right thing to do. It's a very difficult thing, but it's absolutely a crucial part of the plan in terms of getting the affordable housing policies right and ultimately getting the right balance and to boost delivery.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. So feed in your views. It's important to figure out and to get a steer from people on what they think we should be trying to address as part of this important document. Right, let's move to some other questions. At 6:23, Julie on Facebook talks about the declaration of a climate emergency. To what extent would it be able to ensure that all new housing is built to a high standard of insulation, incorporates energy-saving measures such as solar panels, heat pumps, because they are cheaper at the point of build rather than retrofitting? Laura, could you take us through? And we've got a section in the issues and options consultation at the moment on tackling climate change, but what feedback are we looking from the public in terms of again the controls that we can put into this local plan that will affect this in action?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a section about climate change, and this is obviously a really important part of the local plan going forward, and the declaration of the climate emergency and all the guidance that's coming out in relation to addressing climate impacts will be really key for the local plan to address. And there have been changes in building regulations in terms of what new build needs to do in terms of moving towards a sort of net carbon approach. We do have options whether we, as a council, just essentially comply with those building regs and just sort of implement the national approach, or whether we go further than that and whether we try and set a higher local standard beyond those set out in the building regulations. And we do have some powers to do that. So we've set out two options on this point, either essentially going with the building regulations as a starting point, or whether we look to go beyond those and move to a position of net zero carbon quicker than that, through trying to ensure new build does incorporate more of those measures in terms of either reducing carbon usage in particular. So we do have some options surrounding that. There are costs associated with that for the development industry, so it's about weighing up those costs as well in seeking to impose any higher standards, and that does then have a knock-on effect with other things we've talked about being important, such as the affordable housing. The more costs you put on to build costs, etc., impact how much you can get out on other things. But we do have options on climate change, and we are getting some good responses back on that, and obviously people are very passionate about this issue, so that is definitely something we can explore and can help to address through the local plan.
Thank you, Laura. Right, the questions are coming in thick and fast now. Manda Curry at 6:42 talks about renting. My son and daughter-in-law and baby want to move out of the Dorset countryside to be nearer to us. The rents are simply stupid. These are things that need looking at. Nick, talk to me about rental, because one of the things that we've seen in our housing studies is that we've got a growing population of those under 40. We know that many of those now rent. So is it as simple as just building more homes, and then the increase in the number will bring rental levels down, because that's what tends to drive up prices? Or is there a need, and do we need some feedback on whether we need to be encouraging more of the build to rents that we're seeing around, which are proving popular as well? What's your take on that?
Again, it's a very important issue to get right in the plan. And again, it comes down to having the right sort of product. Rents are too high, and it partly is a supply issue. So there is a role, obviously, for increasing supply will help to some degree to help control rents and prices generally, but it's not the only answer. So it comes back to those affordable housing policies and the types of products and promoting build to rents. And build to rents done well, they can be regulated in order to provide rents which are affordable. But it also comes back to the wider economy of BCP and making sure we don't lose sight of ensuring that is promoted as best as possible. We are getting more jobs, more wealth creating jobs, so the right industries coming into the area, to allow people to have the wages required to afford whatever the market levels of rent and prices are. So it's a complicated issue, and it does come down to the evidence and making sure we're doing the right thing in terms of the right sort of developments in the right places with the right policies, and holding the line on affordable housing where we can.
Thanks, Nick. And it's a really good point, isn't it, around our economy as well? Because we've talked a lot during this session around housing and our town centres, but within the local plan, we have to look at where our employment zones are, take analysis of what new sectors and new businesses are emerging in the area, plan into the future, plan for their needs, and make sure that we're embedding that in planning policy as well. But also, what I'd like to talk about, which we haven't had many questions of, is our actual natural environment, our parks, our beaches, our open spaces, which are part of the reason that we all love living in this area. We've got a couple of sections in there, Laura. What kind of feedback are we looking from people on the protecting our environment and our natural spaces that we enjoy so much? How can they get involved, and what options are we considering at this very early stage in that regard?
Yeah, the natural environment of BCP is obviously probably one of the main reasons why a lot of people live here and move to the area in the first place. We understand that's really valued by local residents, as well as people that visit the area as well. Some of these things to do with the natural environment, we've set out recommendations of how we continue to protect our open spaces and our existing protected habitats. We do have a lot of internationally and nationally designated habitats within the BCP area, so we do have legal duties to protect those and prevent development in the vicinity of those as well. So some of those approaches are sort of well established, and we don't actually have many options to do anything too different on that. we do also have to create potentially new areas of open space to help mitigate impacts on those protected habitats. So that's an established approach that we try and take to create new open spaces where we can. We do have some options about how we manage open spaces, what we allow to happen there. Do we allow some small scale things to happen to support the function, make those spaces more multifunctional? We know we're having more homes, and we're going to need to have more homes built within the BCP area, and that does inevitably put pressure on those open spaces. So we need to think kind of creatively about how we use our open spaces, or how different types of spaces might become more multifunctional in the future. So we are asking some questions about that. Alongside this document, we're also sort of developing a separate kind of green infrastructure strategy, which is evidence-based to the local plan as well, which identifies key areas of improvement, which we'll be trying to incorporate into the local plan as it moves forward. So yeah, there are some options to do with open spaces and natural environment, but it's very much a sort of situation of trying to protect, preserve and enhance what we've got, and make the most of it as we move forward, and create those new spaces where there's the opportunities to do so.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Right, we've got about 10 minutes left, so get those last minute questions in. For those of us that are joining at a very late stage, we've been here for 50 minutes talking around the local plan that we're going to be developing later this year. There's a current options and issues consultation that's going on at the moment, which is running until the 25th of March. You can do that online, you can send us an email, you can visit the libraries and check them out in a more physical form, where we're getting an early steer from the public on some of the issues that we've been talking about, so that we know the issues that are important to you, the direction of travel that we want to go down, so that as we move into the creation of that document, we're doing it with the best possible background of what's going to work from a public point of view. I'm just waiting for a few other questions. Nick, I talked earlier on about the housing numbers side. We have these numbers that are we're told that we have to aim for by government. The standard methodology, as they call it, which looks at the suggested population projections, at the moment talk around 2,600, which is a really big target and would probably necessitate a really big change on how we do the area. You talk a little bit more about our alternate method and how we've arrived at that, so that we can get people's feedback on whether they think that's a good idea to major on instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you say, the standard method is the starting point. It basically uses the 2014 household projections with an uplift applied to address affordability, and that generates a very high number of around 2,650 homes a year. But we have looked at this very carefully in terms of what's actually in those 2014 household projections, and it's been identified that there is an issue with the migration statistics used in terms of international migration into the area, and we have basically sort of recalculated that using our demographers. So this is an expertise-led process where basically if you actually apply what's happened in reality over time to the 2014 projections, then it comes up with a different answer basically, and we feel it's more realistic in terms of what the actual need is going forward. So it's still based on the 2014 projections, which is what government requires us to do. Yes, it comes up with a different answer. We think it's more credible in terms of actual need, and it's very much part of this process to get people's views on that, because there is an alternative view that if you build more houses, then affordability will be better, and there may be other benefits from building higher numbers in terms of the employment and economic growth and so forth. But ultimately, it's about getting the right number for this very important area in terms of the places we have to plan for, accommodating that sensitively. So it's a big issue to resolve, and people's views on which number or somewhere in between are very much welcome. But it is down to a demographic rework of the evidence, which is based on what we feel is more realistic.
So looking at it in deeper detail and finding out exactly what we think our housing need is. But again, it's really important that if people think that that's the right way for us to go, to feed into this consultation. That gives us more evidence as well. We think that this new way will help us to really safeguard our green areas, our green belt, and focus that development on brownfield sites. But as I said earlier on, not everybody thinks the same. And there are a number of people, particularly with the affordability difficulties for young people, that think maybe we should go a bit further. But we need your views on all of that. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. I've got a question around engagement from Barbara at 6:47. When can the people of BCP Council be able to meet you face to face and put questions to you? They can respond to your questions. Doesn't think we answer the questions. It's easy to avoid answering. Barbara, you've got lots of ward councillors that, you've got your own ward councillors that you can get in contact with. You go onto the BCP Council website, you can get their individual email addresses or phone numbers. If it's to do with planning, I'm particularly planning strategy, always happy to have a chat. My phone number, mobile number is on the website as well. And I don't know if we've got my email address that you can put on screen. Any particular emails, you can by all means email me and I'll come back to you as quick as possible, sometimes with the answers or sometimes pointing you in the right direction. But I do feel that, the way that we're doing these regular 2 weekly question and answer sessions on everything, are really important. But we're now starting to do many more of these evening sessions where we do a bit more of a deep delve into some of the issues, and so that we can try and get as much public feedback and interaction as possible. We won't get through all of the questions, but we do have a team on hand as well, ready to try and answer as many of the questions that we don't get to in the time as well. So hopefully that answers your question. But by all means, my email address is there, and always happy to interact as much as possible. Right, time for a few more questions, which is probably about right because my voice is about to give up. Right, let's have a look. Let's talk about sewage. Julie Whiteley at 6:53. How will sewage works cope with the new housing as they struggle already? Will new developments have rainwater separated from foul sewerage? Nick, I'm going to go to you on this one because I suppose it's really important, not just for the capacity for new developments, but also issues that we have locally about how development impacts our natural environment. We have nitrates in Poole Harbour, we've got heathland mitigation, and we've got areas in this consultation to feed into that as well, don't we?
Yeah, we do, and we will be working very closely with the infrastructure providers on this. That's part of the process in terms of whatever the number is. We'll be talking to them to test the infrastructure. They need to advise us, can the infrastructure cope with whatever housing is required? And they may well come back to say there are issues with the sewerage infrastructure, and therefore investment needs to be put into that. And it's one of these issues where it wouldn't just be a case of we're just going to build houses for the sake of it. It's got to work. So we need their advice. We need to understand what they might need to expand their capacity. And they have their own, I guess they have their own charging regimes on how they might fund that, and they have other sources. But it could be one of those issues where if it can't be accommodated, then that's another reason for looking for a different housing number. But it is a crucial issue, and it's part of infrastructure planning and working very closely with the operators on the ground. And also in the general sustainable construction arena, which will be part of the plan, is making sure that we are pushing as hard as we can on getting the right sort of localized infrastructure into housing, for doing those sort of things about separating rainwater and ensuring the best possible standards of development can be achieved in any given house. So yeah, it's a really big and important issue, and it needs to be teased out through the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So before we sum up, I was just having a look through the 10 areas that we're covering in this pre-consultation document, and we've covered most of them, which I think is quite useful. But I think one of the things that we maybe haven't touched upon is our economic development and the planning policy around some of our economic sectors, things like business parks, and things as well. Laura, what have we got in terms of this document around our economy? And earlier on, we talked around our interactive maps. Is there the ability for the public to feed into suggestions around employment zones and commercial development to get their views on that as well?
Yes, there absolutely is. And if people go onto the website there, they'll see, as well as some of the housing sites that people can comment on, there are also maps about suggested strategic employment sites and our existing employment areas. So that is another topic that is part of the plan. We appreciate the local plan is covering a lot of different topics. It does range across from sort of housing and employment to natural environment to climate change. It is inevitably quite a big beast, but there is some stuff in there about the economy and employment sites, and that also extends into the visitor economy and leisure sites. We have had some sites promoted to us for leisure uses as well, particularly around the vicinity of the airport, so we'd be keen to get people's views on those as part of the plan, and some of those are within areas currently designated as green belts. So there are some issues with those promotions, so that will be another area where we are keen to get people's views. But certainly on the economic side, we've got current strategic employment areas identified at the airport, at Poole Port, at Talbot Village, at the Lansdowne, and at this stage it's a question of getting people's views on whether it's appropriate to continue with those designations that we've had, whether there's any other areas that we really should be focusing on in terms of allocating for employment. And similarly with other employment sites within the urban area, it's are they still fit for purpose? Many of them are actually thriving, but there are some that perhaps do have some vacant units in now, and should they be repurposed for other uses. So we have mapped all of those employment sites, and again, people can give us their views on those, drop pins on them using the interactive maps and so on. So yeah, that's part of this plan, and be interested to get people's views on those sites as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. Folks, we've run out of time. We've been here for an hour, so I'll draw this to a close now. I want to pay particular thanks to Nick Perrins, our head of planning, Laura Bright, who's been doing a lot of the work on this pre-consultation stage for the local plan. Thank you all for joining us. Apologies that my voice hasn't quite held out. If you've met my 3 children, you'd understand why I have no voice. But it's been a really fun, interactive session. We do still have this consultation underway until the 25th of March. A reminder, this is not the local plan. The local plan comes later on this year. This is the document where we can get that early steer from you guys so that we know exactly what is important to you on some of those high-level issues when we do further consultation rounds and further work later on in the year. So however you want to interact with it, please do so. Check out the website, pop into your library, or email us. Give us your views. Use the interactive maps to look at the sites that have been suggested to us. A reminder, if it's on there, it doesn't mean it's going to be built. It just means that, we're putting every single development that's been suggested to us out there for public feedback. So give us your feedback, interact with that document, and then we'll be doing tremendous more in terms of consultation as we move through the real local plan process later on in the year. So thank you for joining us. We'll answer as many questions as we missed today by the team separately, but have a great evening, and look forward to joining you at more of these sessions in the future. Thank you.